This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're joined in the studio by State Senator Zellnor Myrie, a Brooklyn Democrat who's here to talk about some of the policies in Governor Kathy Hochul's budget and maybe touch on a thing or two that is missing. So the governor has picked up an issue that you began spearheading last year, which is language ensuring that New Yorkers have a pathway in state courts to bring a lawsuit against federal officials for violating their constitutional rights. And this is clearly in response to actions by ICE agents over the last year under the Trump administration. How does your approach to this compare to what Governor Hochul is proposing?
So they're actually pretty close, and I'm excited to see the governor step into this space. During her State of the State, one of the loudest applause that she received was when she was talking about this issue. There was a Siena poll that came out last week, showed that New Yorkers largely want to see this happen. So I think we are where the public is. On substance, there are some minor differences in how the governor approaches accountability for federal, state, and local officials. We do that all together. That is very intentional in order for us to ensure that we are meeting our constitutional demands. But I think that the bills share a lot of commonalities, and I'm really looking forward to us getting this across the finish line because I think the time is now to act.
Well, what is the rationale for acting? Because this is essentially a penalty that could hang over the head of ICE agents. Theoretically, it'll make them think twice before they violate someone's civil rights. But historically, liberals are not a fan of penalties in the sense that they are a deterrent. So is this primarily about providing a pathway to justice after something has occurred, or do you have reason to believe this will actually alter behavior?
So I think there are two things that are happening at exactly the same time. One, it is meant to provide a remedy when someone's constitutional rights are violated. There's a whole line of case law that says if your constitutional right does not have a remedy to be vindicated when it's violated, then is it in fact a right? So there has to be proper remedy. And up until now, that remedy only existed for state and local officials. I'm going to put on my constitutional law professor hat for a second.
And where did you do that studying?
So I went to Cornell.
Okay.
Ever heard of it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So all our Office fans, this is geriatric millennial banter. So for a long time, actually dating back to the 19th century, our federal statutes allowed for you to sue for damages a state or local official who violated your constitutional rights. That was born out of the Civil Rights Act right after Reconstruction because the southern states, after Reconstruction, refused to give newly freed black people all of their rights. And so you had local sheriffs, local elected officials who said, we don't care what you've done on the federal level, we're going to do what we want to do. So Congress said, well, actually not so fast. Here is a tool to help you fix that. But we never provided that same remedy for federal officials. That is what this is trying to do. So yes, it will provide a remedy, but also it will act as a deterrent, hopefully, for anyone who was thinking about violating those rights. I know that sounds a little wonky and that's in the weeds, but we're at a time, I believe, where New Yorkers are expecting us to step up with every single tool that we have, and I'm hoping that this is going to be one of the tools that we are provided.
So why focus just on federal officials in this budget? Why not do a broader look at this idea of qualified immunity for public employees more broadly? There's legislation dealing with law enforcement. Your colleagues on the other side of the aisle have said, well, if it's good enough for law enforcement, make it for everybody. Why not do it for everyone? Why should we just be applying this potential penalty to either law enforcement or, in this case, ICE agents?
So I think that we should be having a broader conversation on qualified immunity. I have sponsored legislation to eliminate it. There are other bills in this space that talk about eliminating qualified immunity. I think that is a worthwhile conversation, but I want to be clear that these are two distinct things legally. What we are saying is that we want to provide an avenue where no avenue exists to hold a federal official accountable, in the same way that there is currently an avenue for you to hold a state and local official accountable, despite qualified immunity being an option. I think that we can do two things and have two separate conversations at the same time. But for purposes of ensuring that we are meeting the bounds of the Constitution, I believe that we should have those conversations separately.
So there is a campaign to end quote-unquote qualified immunity in New York, and they argue that this language as written is well-meaning but ultimately is going to lose. Why are you confident that this response is going to work? And feel free to lean into that Cornell education.
Yeah, so, and it's an excellent point, and it's something worth us discussing. We have, firstly, on the updated version of this bill, the B print, we have changed some of the language to say nothing on qualified immunity and to leave it to the courts to make that decision. And there's a reason for that. If our state version of this bill, if it differs from what the federal standard is right now, and when I talk about the standard, I mean the standard by which a state and local official can be held should they violate your constitutional rights. If this state version is different from that, I believe we open ourselves up to litigation. The Trump administration has been clear about their desire to challenge any of these laws. We've seen them challenge the laws in California, in Illinois, around the country. I am trying to ensure that whatever we do in this moment, where I think people are expecting us to step up, that it can withstand a test in court. So for my allies in the End Qualified Immunity Coalition, we've had a lot of conversations around this. I have hoped for us to get to a point where we can say, for this bill, the New York Civil Rights Act, we are going to be silent on qualified immunity. We will let the courts decide that. And also talk about ending qualified immunity more broadly. I don't think that both of those things can happen in the same bill because I want to ensure that we are withstanding a constitutional challenge.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with State Senator Zellnor Myrie, a Brooklyn Democrat. And turning to another area in the governor's budget, gun control. The governor wants to restrict devices that enable semi-automatic pistols to be utilized like an automatic weapon, and another proposal addresses 3D printed firearms, including tougher penalties for manufacturing weapons, as well as rules for the 3D printers sold in New York in terms of what they're capable of making, trying to prevent them from producing guns or gun components. Are these just feel-good measures given the existence of a black market for guns, or is there reason to believe either or both of these will make New Yorkers demonstrably more safe when it comes to gun violence?
We saw the proliferation of ghost guns. This started a little over a decade ago. And most legislatures, certainly Congress, but most state legislatures were slow in their response to the proliferation of ghost guns because we didn't really understand what it was. And the first canary in the coal mine was ghost guns showing up on crime scenes. And law enforcement started ringing the bell saying, we are seeing a lot more of this thing and not the other thing. Here we find ourselves in a situation where law enforcement is finding a lot more of these 3D printed guns, unserialized. They're finding guns that have been altered to become do-it-yourself machine guns. And I think we have an opportunity, unlike what we did with ghost guns, to not be late to the party and to ensure that we are nipping this in the bud right now. So I don't think that it's just feel good. I think that these are good faith efforts to ensure that New Yorkers remain safe. We have had instances in almost every major city in the state where an autosear, which is that little device that's used to convert a pistol, has been found on a crime scene doing massive damage to the victims and to law enforcement. And we have seen as well, we've heard this from the DAs and other folks, the proliferation of 3D manufacturing and sort of more insidiously, the sharing of the blueprint on how to print these. This is a new world that we're facing where that information is a lot easier to share. So I applaud the governor for taking what would be a first-in-the-nation approach in trying to get the back end of this and to hold folks in the industry accountable.
But as you say, first in the nation, there's 49 other states. So would this just slow someone down if they were trying to obtain a firearm for illegal purposes? Or is there a reason to believe someone would say, well, I guess I can't get it in New York. I guess I have to give up and return to a life of peace and prosperity?
Well, you know, we can only control what happens here in the state of New York. And back in 2020, when I introduced the first bill to hold the gun industry accountable, there were many people who said, this hasn't been done anywhere in the country, so why do you think that this is going to be different? And now I sit across from you today, 10 other states have the same exact law on the books. So New York can lead, and I think the rest of the country can follow. And we've seen that law actually used to shut down ghost gun companies and to keep real weapons off of the streets. I think we're going to see the same thing here.
Well, as you point out, that law has the ability to influence, say, a company's behaviors probably in a way that extends outside of New York's borders. Is there reason to believe that these proposals, specifically probably as it pertains to 3D printed guns, would change the habits of the manufacturers of 3D printers more broadly? Or would they say, can't sell this model in New York, but it's going like gangbusters in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the neighboring states?
I think that remains to be seen, Dave, and because we can't quite figure out what the impact will be more broadly, doesn't preclude us from taking action now. And to be clear, the governor's proposal would get a council together to come up with how exactly this could be effectuated. And I think in that process, we might get to some of these answers to your questions around what the impact may be for a manufacturer who says, I'm just going to not do this in New York and figure it out elsewhere.
Well, lastly, something that is not in the governor's budget and was a priority for advocates on maybe what we think of as both sides of the criminal justice aisle. Progressive advocates were looking for some sort of language ensuring that money is being spent on the implementation of Raise the Age, a law now nearly a decade old, dealing with how we treat 16 and 17-year-olds in the criminal justice system. And on the other side, you had district attorneys looking for additional language that they say is necessary to keep the public safe, basically giving them more info on previous crimes people are alleged to have committed. The governor has heard from both of these people and said, I'm not putting any of this language into my budget. Is that a missed opportunity, or from your perspective, if she had to do one or the other or neither, you'd prefer neither?
I am happy that we don't have to have a drag-out battle on changes to the statutes around Raise the Age.
Well, let's check in with you on March 31st and see what the governor's pushing at the time.
Let's knock on wood on those 30-day amendments. But I'm hopeful that things will remain as the status quo right now. And I think we do still have the opportunity to talk about where the Raise the Age money is, where it has and has not been spent, and also things outside of Raise the Age. The premise of Raise the Age is there are young people that commit crimes or are somehow justice involved, and there should be consequences for those things. And we all accept that. The question is, how do we stop young people in the first instance of being involved? There are things that we can do that are not Raise the Age that speak to that, whether that is after school, whether that is investments in family therapy. There's a pilot that is hopefully going to be put in place. There are things that we can do to invest in young people and their families before we get to a justice question. And my hope is that we can have that conversation in this budget. And if we need to talk about some of the other statutory concerns, et cetera, that we can have that down the line. I think it's smart of the governor, who, given the events of the past couple of weeks, has demonstrated that she does, in fact, know ball and is doing, I think, really smart things to ensure that we keep our focus on standing up for our democracy and keeping New York affordable for most families.
Well, on that note, we've been speaking with State Senator Zellnor Myrie. He is a Brooklyn Democrat. Senator, thanks so much for making the time.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
And for more Capitol Press Room content, visit capitolpressroom.org or wherever you download your favorite podcasts.